My wife brought legal documents to dinner, telling me her sister would manage my clinic and get 45% profit. I opened my briefcase, handed them clause 4.3, and watched my wife freeze. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and your gut starts doing backflips like it's auditioning for Cirque du Soleil? Yeah, well, that's exactly what hit me the second I stepped through the mahogany double doors of my in-laws' McMansion on this particular Sunday afternoon. And let me tell you, after 3 years of marriage to Isabel, I've developed a pretty decent radar for when the Mitchell family is up to something that's going to royally screw me over. The first red flag should have been Isabel practically lunging at me the moment I crossed the threshold, her smile so wide and fake it could have been sponsored by Botox. "Aaron, honey," she chirped, reaching for my coat with the enthusiasm of a car salesman who just spotted a sucker walking onto the lot. "I'm so glad you could make it." Like I had a choice. Sunday dinners at Casa Mitchell weren't exactly optional in our household. They were more like a weekly taxation without representation, if you catch my drift. But here's the thing that really got my spidey senses tingling. Isabel's hands were shaking as she hung up my jacket. Now, my wife might be a lot of things, materialistic, entitled, and about as deep as a kiddie pool, but nervous isn't usually one of them. The woman once returned a perfectly good sweater to Nordstrom because she decided she didn't like the way it made her feel on Tuesdays. Confidence has never been her problem. Then came Martin, my father-in-law, striding over like he owned the place, which, to be fair, he did, along with half the commercial real estate in downtown Seattle. The man grabbed my hand in what I can only describe as a death grip that would have made a mob enforcer proud. "Aaron, my boy," he boomed, pumping my arm like he was trying to strike oil. "Good to see you, son." The way he said son made my skin crawl, probably because it sounded less like familial affection and more like a gangster claiming ownership of his latest acquisition. Now, Martin's always been a firm handshake kind of guy. You know, one of those old-school businessmen who thinks a limp handshake is basically a character flaw. But this was different. This had intent behind it, like he was trying to establish dominance before whatever circus act they had planned for me today. And trust me, with the Mitchell family, there's always a circus act brewing. Clara, Isabel's mother, materialized next to us like some kind of suburban ghost, floating in with that practiced smile she'd probably perfected during her junior league days. "Aaron, darling," she cooed, air-kissing both my cheeks with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. "You look wonderful. A little thin, though. Are you eating enough?" This from a woman whose idea of a hearty meal is a kale salad with a side of judgment. But even Clara seemed off her game tonight. Usually, she'd launch into some passive-aggressive monologue about how I work too much or how I should really consider getting a real haircut instead of whatever my barber was doing to me. Tonight, though, she was being nice, polite, rehearsed, like she'd been practicing lines in the mirror for the past week. And then there was Veronica. Oh, sweet Jesus. Veronica was practically vibrating with excitement, bouncing on her designer heels like a toddler who'd just been promised ice cream for dinner. Isabel's younger sister had this glow about her. Not the healthy kind you get from exercise or good genes, but the scheming kind that politicians get right before they announce their candidacy for higher office. She kept shooting these little conspiratorial glances at her family members, the kind of looks that said, "We're about to pull off the heist of the century, and the mark doesn't suspect a thing." The whole scene felt like I'd walked into some twisted Norman Rockwell painting where everyone was smiling just a little too hard, and the apple pie was probably poisoned. We moved into the dining room, and that's when I knew for sure that something was seriously wrong. The table was set with Clara's finest china, the stuff that usually only came out for Christmas or when she wanted to impress her book club friends with how refined she was. Fresh flowers adorned the center, some expensive-looking arrangement that probably cost more than most people's grocery budget. The whole setup screamed special occasion, except nobody had bothered to tell me what we were celebrating. The napkins were cloth instead of paper. The silverware was the good stuff, not the everyday stainless steel. Hell, they'd even broken out the crystal water glasses that Clara usually kept locked away like they were the crown jewels. Everything was perfectly arranged, perfectly positioned, like we were about to film a commercial for How to Manipulate Your Son-in-Law 101. But the real kicker, the thing that made my chest tighten like someone was slowly turning a vise around my ribcage, was the manila folder sitting beside Martin's plate. Thick, official-looking, The kind of folder that contained either life insurance policies or divorce papers. Given my track record with the Mitchell family, I was betting it wasn't good news. Martin caught me staring at it and actually had the balls to pat the folder possessively, like a dragon guarding its treasure. "Just a little business to discuss after dinner, Aaron," he said with that shark smile of his. "Nothing to worry about." Yeah, right. When a guy like Martin Mitchell says, "nothing to worry about," you'd better start updating your resume and checking your bank account balance. I settled into my usual chair, the one at the far end of the table that made me feel like I was sitting at the kids' table during Thanksgiving, and tried to play it cool. But inside, my brain was going full conspiracy theory mode, running through every possible scenario of how they were planning to screw me over this time. Because make no mistake about it, that's what this was. The Mitchell family didn't break out the good china unless they wanted something, and whatever they wanted, it was big enough to require props and staging. The air in that dining room felt thick enough to cut with a knife, charged with the kind of tension you usually only see in courtrooms or divorce mediation sessions. And there I was, sitting in the middle of it all, wondering how the hell I'd ended up married into a family that treated Sunday dinner like a board meeting where I was apparently the only one who hadn't seen the agenda. So there I was, trapped in what felt like the world's most expensive hostage situation, when Clara decided to kick off the evening's entertainment with her signature move. Small talk so painfully forced it could have been used as a torture technique at Guantanamo Bay. "Aaron, dear, how's the weather been treating you?" she asked, passing around a platter of what looked like artisanal something or other that probably cost more per ounce than my college textbooks. "I mean, seriously? The weather? We live in Seattle, Clara. It's been raining since the Clinton administration, and it'll be raining when your great-grandchildren are collecting Social Security." But I played along like the good little son-in-law I was supposed to be, nodding and making appropriate sounds while internally calculating how many billable hours I'd need to work to afford therapy after this dinner was over. Martin jumped in next with his usual repertoire of awkward dad jokes and comments about the Seahawks' latest disappointing season, but I could see him checking his watch every few minutes like he was waiting for some predetermined moment to drop whatever bomb they'd been cooking up. The man had all the subtlety of a freight train carrying dynamite. But it was Isabel who really started laying the groundwork for whatever fresh hell they had planned. She began steering the conversation toward my clinic with the precision of a GPS system that had been programmed by someone with seriously questionable intentions. "You know, Aaron," she said, cutting her salmon into perfect little squares like she was performing surgery, "you've been working so incredibly hard lately. I barely see you anymore." Now, let me pause here for a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of this statement. This coming from a woman whose most strenuous weekly activity was deciding which yoga class to skip so she could get her nails done instead. Isabel's idea of hard work was choosing between the vanilla latte and the caramel macchiato at Starbucks. But sure, let's talk about my work ethic like it's some kind of character flaw. "I mean," she continued, reaching over to squeeze my hand with what I'm sure she thought was loving concern, "when was the last time you took a real vacation? Or even a weekend off?" The way she said it made it sound like I was some kind of workaholic who'd lost touch with what really mattered in life, instead of a guy who was busting his ass to build something meaningful while supporting a wife whose monthly shopping budget could fund a small country's military. Veronica nodded enthusiastically, like Isabel had just solved world hunger. "Totally. Work-life balance is so important these days. You can't pour from an empty cup, you know?" This from someone whose longest employment stint was a 3-month gig as a social media influencer for a company that sold overpriced scented candles to suburban moms with too much disposable income. But here's where things got really interesting. Martin suddenly straightened up in his chair, cleared his throat with the gravitas of a Supreme Court justice about to deliver a landmark ruling, and gave everyone at the table this look that said, "Ladies and gentlemen, it's showtime." "You know, Aaron," he began, his voice taking on that particular tone that rich guys use when they're about to explain why screwing you over is actually doing you a favor. Isabel raises an excellent point about balance. And it got me thinking about something we've been discussing as a family. Oh, here we go. They've been discussing me as a family. How absolutely delightful. Nothing says healthy marriage like your wife's parents holding strategy sessions about your career choices behind your back. Martin leaned forward, steepling his fingers like some kind of corporate Yoda about to dispense wisdom that would probably cost me thousands of dollars. Family businesses, he announced, need family management. Clara nodded so vigorously I was worried she might give herself whiplash. It's only natural, she chimed in, as if this was some kind of universal law instead of grade A bullshit they'd just made up to justify whatever scheme they were running. And then Isabel dropped the hammer. With that sweet, innocent smile that had probably gotten her out of trouble since she was 5 years old, she reached for the manila folder that had been sitting there like a loaded gun all evening. Actually, honey, she said, sliding the folder across the table toward me like she was dealing cards in some high-stakes poker game. Veronica has put together the most amazing business plan. Veronica practically glowed with pride, sitting up straighter and smoothing down her hair like she was about to accept an Academy Award. I've been doing so much research, Aaron, she gushed, her voice bubbling with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for multi-level marketing schemes and door-to-door vacuum cleaner sales. I know I can really help take your clinic to the next level. My fork, which had been making its way toward my mouth with a piece of perfectly seasoned asparagus, froze mid-air like someone had hit the pause button on my entire nervous system. Take my clinic to the next level? The clinic I'd built from nothing? The clinic I'd poured every ounce of my blood, sweat, and what remained of my sanity into creating. See, Veronica continued, clearly mistaking my stunned silence for rapt attention. I'd handle all the day-to-day management stuff. You know, the boring paperwork, the scheduling, the business development. You could focus on what you're really good at, which is, like, the actual doctoring part. The actual doctoring part. Jesus Christ, she made it sound like I was some kind of trained monkey who could perform medical procedures but couldn't be trusted to tie my own shoes without supervision. Martin jumped back in, sensing that the pitch needed some heavyweight support. Veronica's got a real head for business, Aaron. Always has. Remember when she was 12 and started that lemonade stand? Pure entrepreneurial spirit. Yeah, I remembered the lemonade stand. I also remembered how it lasted exactly one weekend before Veronica got bored and convinced her parents to buy her a new bike instead. But sure, let's call that entrepreneurial spirit instead of what it actually was, a short attention span and wealthy parents willing to enable it. The best part, Isabel said, her voice dripping with fake excitement, is that it's all family. You won't have to worry about training some stranger or dealing with trust issues. Veronica already knows us. She understands the family dynamic, and she's got all these fresh ideas about how to expand the patient base and increase revenue streams. And then came the kicker, delivered with all the casual indifference of someone ordering a coffee. All she's asking for is 45% of the profits. 45% of the profits from the clinic that I built with my own hands, while they were all living their best lives on trust fund money and Instagram selfies. My fork was still suspended in midair, asparagus dangling like it was afraid to move, while my brain tried to process the sheer magnitude of what they'd just proposed. They wanted to give my sister-in-law nearly half of everything I'd worked for, just because she was family and had watched a few episodes of Shark Tank. The dining room fell silent except for the gentle clink of Clara's bracelet against her wine glass and the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears like a freight train approaching a collapsed bridge. You ever have one of those moments where time just stops and your brain decides to take a little trip down memory lane at the absolute worst possible moment? Yeah, well, that's exactly what happened while Veronica was sitting there preening like a peacock who'd just discovered mirrors, going on and on about her natural business instincts, and how she was basically the Steve Jobs of healthcare management. While she yapped about synergies and growth potential, buzzwords she'd probably picked up from whatever business podcast she'd binged last week, my mind went straight back to the beginning. Back to when I was pulling 36-hour shifts at Seattle General, surviving on vending machine coffee and whatever questionable sandwich meat they had in the hospital cafeteria, while slowly losing my damn mind, trying to save up enough money to open my own practice. I remembered those nights when I'd crash in the on-call room, using my lab coat as a blanket because I was too exhausted to drive the 45 minutes back to the apartment I could barely afford. Meanwhile, Isabel was posting Instagram stories from her weekend spa retreats with Veronica, complaining about how the cucumber water wasn't cold enough or how the massage therapist didn't use enough pressure on her stress knots. Stress knots? From what? deciding which Pilates class to attend. Those memories hit me like a freight train carrying a cargo load of pure, concentrated resentment. I could practically feel every single sleepless night, every skipped meal, every time I'd chosen to eat ramen noodles for the third day in a row so I could put another $100 toward my clinic fund. While I was literally grinding myself into dust, the Mitchell family was living their best life, completely oblivious to the fact that building something from nothing actually requires, work. And the loans. Jesus Christ, the loans. I'd gone to 3 different banks, getting rejected more times than a nerdy kid asking the prom queen to dance, before finally finding someone willing to take a chance on a guy with more dreams than collateral. The paperwork alone could have wallpapered my entire apartment, and the interest rates were so high they made loan sharks look generous. But did I get any help from my new family? Did Martin, with his extensive business connections and enough cash to buy a small island, offer to co-sign or provide some guidance? Hell no. Instead, I got lectures about the importance of building character through adversity and learning to stand on your own 2 feet. Easy words from a guy whose idea of adversity was having to wait 5 minutes for his country club's valet service. But wait, it gets better. While I was practically living at the clinic during those first few months, sleeping on a cot in what would eventually become my office because I couldn't afford both rent and the equipment I needed, Isabel was mysteriously unavailable for moral support. Where was she during those crucial early days when I was installing flooring myself because I couldn't afford contractors? Oh right, she was on a sisterly bonding trip to Cabo with Veronica, posting bikini selfies and complaining about how the resort's Wi-Fi was too slow to properly upload her vacation photos. And speaking of Veronica, let me tell you about the time, about 18 months into our marriage, when she'd blown through her monthly allowance from Daddy by the second week and came crying to us about not being able to make rent. Not because she'd had some emergency or unexpected expense, mind you, but because she'd decided that a weekend in Vegas with her college friends was more important than, having shelter. Guess who ended up covering her $2,400 rent payment? That's right, the guy who was still eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day and driving a Honda Civic that sounded like it was slowly dying of emphysema. I'd handed over that money I'd been saving for new diagnostic equipment, because Isabel gave me those puppy dog eyes and explained how family takes care of family. Funny how that family loyalty only seemed to flow in one direction, isn't it? The worst part was watching them treat my clinic like it was some kind of hobby instead of a legitimate business. They'd drop by unannounced, expecting tours for their friends, asking if I could squeeze in appointments for people they knew, completely ignoring the fact that I had actual paying patients with real medical needs. Clara once brought her entire book club through during business hours, treating the place like it was a museum exhibit instead of a functioning medical practice. And the free treatments. Oh man, the free treatments. Martin's chronic back pain that required monthly adjustments. Clara's mysterious headaches that somehow only flared up right around the time she needed to look perfect for some charity gala. Veronica's various sports injuries from activities she tried for exactly 2 weeks before getting bored and moving on to something else. I'd been keeping track, not because I'm petty, but because I'm a responsible business owner who needs to know where his revenue is going. Over the past 3 years, I'd provided over $38,000 worth of free services to the Mitchell family. 38 grand that could have gone toward expanding the clinic, hiring additional staff, or maybe, just maybe, allowing me to take a vacation that didn't involve sleeping in my car at a rest stop. But did they see it that way? Did they appreciate the fact that I was essentially subsidizing their health care while barely keeping my own business afloat? Of course not. In their minds, I was just doing what family does, except somehow the reciprocal part of that equation never seemed to apply when I needed something. I thought about all those times I'd worked through lunch, grabbing whatever I could from the vending machine downstairs while reviewing patient files, because I couldn't afford to close the clinic for an hour. Meanwhile, Isabel was texting me photos of her $30 artisanal salads from whatever trendy restaurant she was trying that week with her unemployed sister. The real kicker was how they talked about my work when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Like it was cute that I had this little medical practice, this adorable side project that kept me busy while the real adults handled important things like choosing investment portfolios and planning charity auction themes. They never saw the late nights spent balancing books, the stress of making payroll, the constant pressure of being responsible for other people's health and well-being. To them, my clinic wasn't the culmination of years of education, sacrifice, and backbreaking work. It was just another asset in the family portfolio, something that generated money they could figure out how to spend. They looked at my life's work and saw dollar signs, profit margins, and opportunities for their precious Veronica to play businesswoman without any of the actual risk or investment. And now here they were, sitting around this perfectly staged dinner table, expecting me to just hand over nearly half of everything I'd built because they'd decided it was time for family management. Like my blood, sweat, and tears were just the opening act for the real show starring Veronica Mitchell and her groundbreaking business acumen. So there I was, still mentally calculating the astronomical cost of my in-laws' entitlement, when Veronica decided it was time to really lay on the charm offensive. She leaned forward with the confidence of someone who'd clearly practiced this pitch in front of her bedroom mirror, probably while wearing one of those ridiculous power blazers she'd bought after watching too many episodes of Suits. "See, Aaron," she began, her voice taking on that patronizing tone that people use when they're about to explain why giving them your money is actually the smartest thing you could possibly do. "What you've got here is a classic case of a brilliant professional who's spread too thin. You're amazing at the medical stuff. Like, seriously, everyone says you're super talented, but the business side? That's where you're losing money. Losing money. Right." The clinic that had been steadily growing its patient base, expanding its services, and actually turning a profit was apparently hemorrhaging cash because I hadn't handed the reins over to someone whose most recent business experience involved selling essential oils to her yoga classmates. "I mean, when was the last time you really looked at your profit margins?" she continued, pulling out what looked suspiciously like a PowerPoint presentation printed on cardstock. "Or analyzed your customer acquisition costs? Do you even have a comprehensive digital marketing strategy?" Customer acquisition costs. For a medical practice. Because apparently, sick people were now customers who needed to be acquired through strategic marketing campaigns instead of, word-of-mouth referrals from satisfied patients who actually got better under my care. But Veronica was just getting started. She'd clearly spent some quality time with Google and maybe a business book or two, because she was throwing around terms like operational efficiency and scalable growth models with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just discovered fire. "What I'm proposing," she said, spreading her homemade charts across the table like she was presenting the blueprints for the next Amazon, "is a complete restructuring of your current business model. A complete restructuring of the business model that was working just fine. Thank you very much. First, we'd implement a comprehensive patient management system that maximizes appointment throughput while minimizing administrative overhead," she announced, clearly proud of herself for stringing together that many business buzzwords in one sentence. "Then we develop targeted marketing campaigns to expand into underserved demographic segments." Translation: pack more patients into shorter time slots and advertise to people who couldn't afford quality healthcare. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Martin nodded along like Veronica was reciting the Constitution, occasionally making approving grunts that sounded suspiciously like a seal who'd learned to express satisfaction. "She's really done her homework, Aaron," he said, as if homework was somehow equivalent to years of medical training and actual business experience. "I'm impressed with the thoroughness of her analysis." Her analysis? Based on what, exactly? A quick Google search, and maybe a conversation with her hairdresser about how businesses should be run? But wait, there was more. Because Veronica had apparently decided that what my medical practice really needed was a complete brand overhaul. "I'm thinking we rebrand the whole experience," she said, her eyes lighting up like a kid who'd just discovered the toy aisle at Target. "Maybe something like Mitchell Wellness Solutions or Holistic Health Hub. Something that sounds more approachable and modern. Mitchell Wellness Solutions. Because nothing says, 'Trust me with your medical care,' like slapping the family name on a business they had absolutely nothing to do with building. And the boring paperwork stuff, insurance claims, scheduling, vendor negotiations, I'd handle all of that so you can focus on what you're passionate about," Veronica continued, making it sound like she was offering to take out my garbage instead of proposing to control every aspect of my business's operations. "You'd basically be able to just walk in, see patients, and walk out. No stress, no administrative headaches. Just pure medical practice. Just pure medical practice. Like running a successful clinic was as simple as showing up and pointing a stethoscope at people. Never mind the fact that understanding insurance regulations, managing staff, maintaining equipment, and handling vendor relationships were all crucial skills that took years to develop and even longer to master. Isabel jumped in with her own contribution to this masterpiece of delusion. "And think about how much more time we'd have together," she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand with what I'm sure she thought was loving encouragement. "No more late nights at the office, no more weekend emergencies. We could actually have a normal marriage." A normal marriage. Apparently, having a successful career that required dedication and hard work was abnormal. Who knew? Clara decided to add her own wisdom to the mix. Because why should Veronica have all the fun? Family businesses are so much more stable, she declared with the authority of someone who'd never actually run a business but had watched her husband inherit one. When you keep everything in the family, you don't have to worry about trust issues or conflicting interests. Conflicting interests. That was rich, coming from people whose primary interests seemed to be figuring out how to profit from my work without actually contributing anything meaningful to it. And then Martin delivered what he clearly thought was the coup de grace. He placed the contract directly in front of me with the solemnity of someone presenting a peace treaty that would end all wars. "We've already had our attorney draft up the paperwork," he announced, his voice thick with smugness. All the legal I's dotted and T's crossed. Very straightforward, very fair to everyone involved. Fair to everyone involved. Except for the guy who'd actually built the business they were trying to carve up like a Thanksgiving turkey. "The profit split is very reasonable," Clara murmured, clearly trying to sound like the voice of maternal wisdom instead of a co-conspirator in what was basically a family-sanctioned heist. 45% for management services is well within industry standards. Industry standards. For what industry exactly? The nepotism industry? The let's exploit our son-in-law industry? I reached for my water glass, taking a slow, deliberate sip while the entire Mitchell family stared at me like vultures waiting for roadkill to stop twitching. The silence stretched out, thick and expectant, while they waited for me to express my gratitude for this generous opportunity to hand over nearly half of everything I'd worked for. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I'd be so overwhelmed by their united front, so grateful for their offer to help, that I'd just sign on the dotted line and thank them for the privilege of being robbed blind by my own family. They had no idea what was sitting in my briefcase. You know that moment in every good heist movie where the mark thinks they've got everything figured out, and then the real mastermind reveals they've been 3 steps ahead the whole time? Yeah, well, welcome to my personal Ocean's 11 moment. Except instead of stealing from a casino, I was about to school my own family on what happens when you underestimate the guy you think is too nice to fight back. I set my water glass down with deliberate precision, the kind of calculated movement that would have made a chess grandmaster proud, and reached for my briefcase. Now, this wasn't just any briefcase. This was my good briefcase, the one I'd bought specifically for important meetings with insurance executives and hospital administrators. Italian leather, brass fittings, the kind of briefcase that says, "I'm not screwing around," without having to actually say it out loud. The click of the lock's opening echoed through that dining room like a gunshot in a library. I swear I could feel the entire Mitchell family's collective sphincter tighten as that sound cut through their smugness like a hot knife through butter. Martin's confident smile flickered for just a second, like a fluorescent light that's about to burn out. Clara's perfectly manicured fingers paused halfway to her wine glass. Veronica's PowerPoint presentation suddenly didn't seem quite as important as it had 30 seconds ago. But the real prize was watching Isabel's face. My dear, sweet wife, who'd clearly thought she'd married a pushover who would just roll over and play dead whenever her family decided to shake him down for lunch money. Looked like she'd just watched her favorite reality TV show get canceled mid-season. "Before we continue," I said, my voice calm and measured in that way that should have been their first clue that something was about to go very, very wrong with their little scheme, "there's something you should probably see." I reached into my briefcase with all the drama of a magician about to pull a rabbit out of a hat, except instead of a rabbit, I was about to produce something that would make their whole carefully orchestrated dinner party blow up in their faces like a defective firework. The first document I placed on the table was a thing of beauty, crisp, professional, with that official letterhead that makes lawyers charge $500 an hour just to look at it. This, I announced, sliding it across the table toward Martin like I was dealing the winning hand in a poker game, is the management services agreement I signed 3 weeks ago with Summit Health Partners. 3 weeks ago. While they'd been planning their little ambush, thinking they were so clever with their family meeting and their PowerPoint presentations and their presumptions about my business naivety, I'd been making moves of my own. Funny how that works out. Martin's face went through more color changes than a mood ring at a bipolar convention. He reached for the document with the enthusiasm of someone picking up a live scorpion, and I could practically see his blood pressure spiking as he scanned the first page. Summit Health Partners, I continued, my voice taking on that helpful, educational tone that teachers use when they're explaining something really obvious to particularly slow students, is one of the most respected healthcare management firms in the Pacific Northwest. They specialize in helping independent practices like mine streamline operations while maintaining complete clinical autonomy. Clara leaned over to peer at the document, her reading glasses sliding down her nose as she tried to make sense of what she was looking at. I don't understand, she said, her voice wavering like she'd just realized her retirement fund was invested in cryptocurrency. What does this mean? What it meant, dear Clara, was that while your family was sitting around planning how to carve up my business like a Christmas ham, I was actually doing something productive. But I decided to be helpful and point out the specific clause that was about to ruin their entire evening. If you look at page 4, clause 4.3, I said, helpfully highlighting the relevant section with my finger, you'll see it's highlighted in bright yellow for your convenience. It clearly states that no family members may be employed in management positions without unanimous board approval. Unanimous board approval. 3 little words that basically meant Veronica had about as much chance of managing my clinic as she did of being elected pope. The silence that followed was absolutely delicious. It was the kind of silence you get when a group of people suddenly realize they've been playing checkers while their opponent was playing chess, and they're about to get checkmated in front of their friends. Veronica was the first to break, her voice climbing about 3 octaves as the reality of the situation started to sink in. But that's not fair, she whined, sounding remarkably like a 5-year-old who'd just been told she couldn't have ice cream for dinner. You didn't even give us a chance to present our proposal. Oh, sweet, naive Veronica. I'd given them plenty of chances, 3 years' worth of chances, in fact. 3 years of watching them treat my clinic like their personal ATM, 3 years of listening to their suggestions about how I should run my business, 3 years of being patronized and condescended to by people who couldn't run a lemonade stand without driving it into bankruptcy. Actually, I said, enjoying every second of watching their master plan crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. The board already reviewed and rejected a similar proposal last month. Something about maintaining professional standards and avoiding conflicts of interest. That last part wasn't entirely true. I'd never actually presented their proposal to the board, mostly because I'm not an idiot, but they didn't need to know that. Sometimes a little creative interpretation of the truth is necessary for dramatic effect. Martin tried to rally, because guys like him don't go down without a fight, even when they're clearly outgunned and outmaneuvered. Well, surely there's some room for negotiation, he said, his voice carrying just a hint of desperation beneath the bluster. These contracts can always be modified if all parties agree. All parties agree. Like Summit Health Partners was going to risk their professional reputation to help the Mitchell family stage a corporate coup against their own client. That's not how business works in the real world, Martin, no matter how many country club connections you think you have. I'm afraid not, I replied, my tone as sympathetic as a funeral director explaining cremation options. The contract is pretty ironclad. Summit Health has very strict policies about family involvement in client businesses. Something about maintaining objectivity and preventing conflicts of interest. Isabel's smile, that perfect, practiced smile she'd been wearing all evening like a mask, finally started to crack around the edges. It was like watching a dam develop its first hairline fracture, knowing that the whole thing was about to come apart in spectacular fashion. But I wasn't done yet. Oh no, not by a long shot. This was just the opening act. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, I was about to serve up a whole goddamn buffet, and every single course was going to be ice cold and perfectly seasoned with 3 years' worth of accumulated resentment. Because while watching their faces crumble over the Summit Health contract was satisfying as hell, I was just getting warmed up. I reached back into my briefcase. And let me tell you, this thing was like Mary Poppins' bag at this point, just full of surprises that kept getting better and better, and pulled out another folder. This one was thicker, more worn around the edges, with little yellow sticky notes poking out like tiny flags of vindication. Since we're being so transparent about business arrangements, I said, setting the folder down with the same care a bomb disposal expert uses when handling live explosives, I thought you might be interested in reviewing some historical data about family involvement in my clinic. Historical data. I love that phrase because it sounds so clinical and professional, when what I really meant was, here's all the evidence of how your precious daughter has already proven she's about as qualified to run a medical practice as a golden retriever is to perform brain surgery. Martin's eyes narrowed like he was trying to calculate exactly how screwed they were, which, spoiler alert, was pretty damn screwed. What kind of historical data? He asked, his voice carrying about as much confidence as a weather forecaster predicting sunshine during a hurricane. I'm so glad you asked, I replied, opening the folder with theatrical flair that would have made Broadway producers weep with pride. These are patient complaint forms from the 3-month period when Veronica was helping out at the clinic. You remember that time, don't you, Veronica? When you insisted you could handle some of the administrative duties while I focused on patient care. Oh, I remembered that period, all right. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, except the car was my professional reputation and the crash was happening in real time with actual sick people caught in the wreckage. Veronica's face went through more color changes than a mood ring having an identity crisis. That's not fair, she protested, her voice climbing toward frequencies that only dogs could hear. I was just learning the system. Everyone makes mistakes when they're starting out. Everyone makes mistakes. Right. Let's talk about those mistakes, shall we? I pulled out the first complaint form, holding it up like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. Mrs. Henderson, 67 years old, diabetic. I read aloud. Quote, the girl at the front desk told me I didn't need to worry about my blood sugar levels because I looked skinny enough. End quote. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a scalpel. Clara looked like she'd just swallowed a live eel, and Martin was developing a facial tic that suggested his blood pressure was approaching stroke levels. But wait, there's more. Because Veronica's greatest hits collection was extensive enough to warrant its own anthology. Mr. Rodriguez, construction worker with a back injury. I continued, flipping to the next form. Quote, the receptionist suggested I try yoga instead of physical therapy because it worked for her friend's stress. End quote. Stress. She'd compared a herniated disc to stress and recommended yoga like she was some kind of wellness guru instead of someone whose medical training consisted of watching Grey's Anatomy reruns. And then there's my personal favorite, I said, savoring every word like fine wine. Mrs. Chun, elderly woman with arthritis. Quote, the young woman offered me a discount if I brought in more patients, like it was some kind of multi-level marketing scheme. End quote. A multi-level marketing scheme. Because apparently, Veronica thought running a medical practice was basically the same thing as selling essential oils to suburban housewives. Veronica tried to interrupt, her voice reaching new heights of indignation. Those people didn't understand what I was trying to do. I was being innovative, thinking outside the box. Innovative. That's what we're calling medical malpractice these days. Innovative thinking? Oh, but the complaints were just the beginning, I said, reaching for another section of the folder. Let's talk about the unauthorized discounts you gave to your friends. Remember Ashley from your yoga class? The one who came in for a consultation and somehow walked out having paid exactly $0 for a 40-minute session. Martin's face was now the color of an overripe tomato, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to calculate the financial damage his daughter had caused. How much did these innovative approaches cost the clinic? He asked, his voice sounding like gravel being poured down a drain. I'm so glad you asked, I replied, pulling out a spreadsheet that I'd lovingly color-coded for maximum visual impact. Between the unauthorized discounts, the refunds I had to issue due to patient complaints, and the near miss with that insurance audit. You remember the insurance audit, don't you, Veronica? The one that almost cost me my provider contract because you filed claims using your own made-up diagnostic codes. Oh, the insurance audit. That had been a fun week, trying to explain to stone-faced bureaucrats why my clinic had submitted claims for conditions that didn't actually exist in medical literature. The total cost of Veronica's 3-month learning experience, I announced, letting the suspense build like a drum roll before the big reveal, was $12,847 in direct losses, plus approximately $25,000 in potential lost revenue from patients who never came back. $37,847. That number hung in the air like a bad smell that wouldn't go away, but I still wasn't finished. Oh no, not even close. Because the third folder I pulled out was the real showstopper, the grand finale that was going to make everything else look like the opening act at a community theater production. And since we're talking about family contributions to the clinic's success, I said, spreading out a series of financial documents like I was laying out a poker hand, I thought you might be interested in seeing exactly how much your family has invested in my business over the years. I could see Isabel's eyes widening as she realized where this was going, and for the first time all evening, she looked like she actually understood that maybe, just maybe, they'd bitten off more than they could chew. This, I said, pointing to a highlighted section on the first page, is a detailed accounting of all the free medical services I've provided to the Mitchell family over the past 3 years. Martin's monthly back adjustments, Clara's migraine treatments, Veronica's various sports injury consultations, and Isabel's dermatological procedures. The total at the bottom of the page was highlighted in bright red, like a warning sign on a dangerous curve. $38,247. $38,247 in free healthcare, while I was eating ramen noodles and sleeping in my office to keep the business afloat. If you've ever watched a controlled demolition of a building, you know there's this perfect moment when the charges go off and the whole structure just collapses in on itself. That's exactly what happened to the Mitchell family's carefully constructed facade the second that $38,247 figure sank into their entitled little brains. The dining room erupted like a volcano full of privilege and wounded pride. Veronica was the first to blow her gasket, shooting up from her chair so fast she nearly knocked over her wine glass. "That's completely unfair," she shrieked, her voice hitting frequencies that could probably shatter crystal. "You're twisting everything around. Those weren't mistakes. They were learning experiences." Learning experiences? Right. I guess nearly getting my medical license revoked was just tuition for Veronica's education in how not to run a healthcare facility. And those treatments weren't free, she continued, waving her hands around like she was conducting an orchestra of indignation. "We're family. Family helps family. You can't put a price tag on family support." "Oh, but I could, Veronica. I'd just done exactly that, complete with itemized receipts and insurance billing codes." Funny how family support only seemed to flow in one direction, though. Martin tried to regain control of the situation because guys like him hate losing the upper hand almost as much as they hate paying retail prices. "Now, Aaron," he started, his voice taking on that patronizing tone rich guys use when they're about to explain why screwing you over is actually good for you. "I think you're being a little unreasonable here. We never asked for those treatments to be free. Never asked for them to be free. That was technically true, if you ignored the part where they'd never once offered to pay, never questioned why they weren't getting bills, and basically treated my clinic like their personal medical concierge service." "You're right," I said, my voice calm as a frozen lake. "You never asked. You just assumed. The same way you're assuming now that I'd be thrilled to hand over 45% of my business to someone whose greatest professional achievement is getting a customer service complaint filed against her by a senior citizen with arthritis." Clara decided to jump into the fray, because apparently this family reunion wasn't quite chaotic enough yet. "Aaron, honey," she said, clutching her chest like she was auditioning for a daytime soap opera, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We only want what's best for you and the clinic." "What's best for me?" That's rich, coming from someone who'd spent the last 3 years treating me like an ATM with a medical degree. "Everyone just needs to calm down," Isabel chimed in, trying to play the peacemaker role she'd clearly rehearsed in her head. "Aaron, you're being unreasonable. We're trying to help you, and you're acting like we're trying to steal from you or something." acting like they were trying to steal from me. Because wanting 45% of my life's work in exchange for Veronica's proven ability to alienate patients and nearly destroy my professional reputation was totally reasonable. That's when I stood up. Not dramatically, not with any grand gestures, just a simple, measured movement that somehow felt like the most powerful thing I'd ever done. For the first time in 3 years of sitting at this table, feeling like a guest at my own family dinner, I felt taller than everyone else in the room. You want to know what's unreasonable? I asked, my voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that makes people stop talking and start listening. What's unreasonable is spending 3 years watching you all treat my clinic like your personal piggy bank, while I worked myself into the ground to keep it running. The silence that followed was beautiful. Pure, crystalline silence that cut through their protests like a hot knife through butter. What's unreasonable, I continued, really hitting my stride now, is listening to Veronica lecture me about business management when she couldn't successfully manage a lemonade stand without running it into bankruptcy and blaming the customers for not appreciating her innovative approach to citrus-based beverages. Veronica's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. Probably for the first time in her adult life, she was literally speechless. What's unreasonable is sitting here listening to you all talk about family loyalty while you plan how to divvy up the profits from a business you had absolutely nothing to do with building. Martin tried to interrupt, his face now resembling an overripe eggplant. Aaron, I think you're forgetting that family. No, I said, cutting him off with the kind of finality that ends conversations. I'm not forgetting anything. I'm remembering everything. Every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every time I chose to invest in my clinic instead of taking a vacation because I actually gave a damn about building something meaningful. I reached for my briefcase, closing it with the same deliberate precision I'd used to open it. The click of the locks sounded like a judge's gavel ending a trial. My clinic isn't your piggy bank, I said, looking each of them in the eye with the kind of steady gaze that makes liars uncomfortable. It's not your retirement plan. It's not your daughter's playground. And it's sure as hell not your family's consolation prize for raising someone who thinks medical billing codes are more like suggestions than actual requirements. Clara gasped like I'd just announced I was joining a cult, and Isabel's perfect composure finally cracked completely. Aaron, she whispered, and for the first time all evening, she sounded like the woman I'd married instead of a stranger reading from a script. You'd really put your business before your family? Before my family. Like wanting to maintain control of the business I'd built with my own hands was somehow a betrayal of family values. No, Isabel, I replied, and I could feel something fundamental shifting inside me, like tectonic plates realigning after an earthquake. I'm putting boundaries before exploitation. I'm putting my life's work before your family's sense of entitlement. I'm putting professional integrity before whatever this is supposed to be. I gestured around the dining room with its staged perfection and calculated manipulation. You want to call that putting business before family? Fine. But don't pretend this is about family loyalty when what you really mean is that you expected me to roll over and play dead while you carved up everything I've worked for. The dining room felt different now, like the air pressure had changed. Their power was broken, their carefully laid plans scattered like confetti after a parade. For the first time since I'd walked through their front door, I felt like I could breathe again. And they looked exactly like what they were. A group of people who'd just realized they'd underestimated the guy they thought was too polite to fight back. You know how in action movies, after the big explosion, there's always that moment of eerie silence before the debris starts raining down? Yeah, well, walking out of the Mitchell family mansion that night felt exactly like that, except instead of rubble falling from the sky, I had the distinct feeling that my marriage was about to come crashing down around my ears. I drove home to my own apartment. Yeah, that's right, my own apartment, because about 6 months into this matrimonial adventure, I'd figured out that keeping my own place was probably the smartest financial decision I'd ever make. Call it insurance, call it a backup plan, or call it the subconscious knowledge that marrying into the Mitchell family was like signing up for a lifetime subscription to being professionally disappointed. The apartment wasn't much to look at, a one-bedroom place in Capitol Hill that I'd originally rented when I was still an overworked resident with dreams bigger than my bank account. But it was mine, paid for with money I'd earned myself, furnished with stuff I'd actually chosen instead of inherited from someone's dead great-aunt's estate sale. No imported Italian marble, no family portraits glaring down at me from gilded frames, no subtle reminders that I was basically a guest in my own life. I cracked open a beer. A perfectly ordinary, non-artisanal beer that probably cost less than what the Mitchells spent on a single bottle of their pretentious wine collection, and settled into my beat-up leather recliner. The kind of chair that actually looked better with age, unlike certain family relationships I could mention. That's when the memories really started flooding back, and let me tell you, it was like watching a highlight reel of every moment over the past 3 years when I should have seen this coming. Because here's the thing about the Mitchell family. They'd never been subtle about viewing me as an investment opportunity rather than, an actual human being with thoughts and feelings and basic property rights. I remembered the conversation at our engagement party, when Martin had pulled me aside with that conspiratorial smile and started talking about family synergy and leveraging collective resources. At the time, I thought he was just being friendly, maybe a little buzzed on champagne and paternal pride. Now I realized he'd been conducting a feasibility study for tonight's hostile takeover attempt. Then there was the time, about a year into our marriage, when Clara had casually mentioned how wonderful it would be if Veronica could get some real-world business experience somewhere. She'd said it with that innocent tone that mothers use when they're suggesting you might want to consider giving their precious daughter a kidney, just as a favor to the family. And Isabel, Jesus, Isabel. Looking back, I could see the pattern clear as day. Every conversation about my work had been peppered with little comments about how I was working too hard and needed to delegate more. I'd thought she was being supportive, worried about my stress levels and work-life balance. Turns out she was basically conducting market research for tonight's ambush. The really twisted part was how they'd made me feel guilty for working hard. Like dedication to my profession was some kind of character flaw instead of, the reason I could afford to keep their daughter in the lifestyle to which she'd become accustomed. Every late night at the clinic, every weekend I'd spent catching up on paperwork, every time I'd chosen professional responsibility over family dinner had been filed away as evidence of my need for better management. My phone started buzzing around 10 o'clock. First, it was Isabel. "Aaron, we need to talk. What happened tonight was completely unacceptable." "Call me." "Unacceptable." "Right. Refusing to be financially manipulated by my own family was unacceptable, but staging an intervention to steal my business was just good old-fashioned family planning." Delete. Then Martin tried his luck, probably figuring that man-to-man diplomacy might work where his daughter's emotional manipulation had failed. "Aaron, I think there may have been some miscommunication tonight. Let's discuss this like adults. I'm sure we can find a mutually beneficial arrangement." Mutually beneficial arrangement. Translation: let's figure out a way to screw you over that you'll actually agree to. Delete. Clara's text was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation disguised as maternal concern. "Aaron, dear, I'm worried about you. You seem so stressed tonight. Family shouldn't fight like this. We love you and only want what's best. Please call when you're ready to work this out. We love you." "Sure you do, Clara. You love me the same way vultures love roadkill, as an opportunity to feed yourselves." Delete. But it was Veronica's message that really took the cake. "Aaron, I can't believe you're being so selfish about this. I put a lot of work into that business plan, and you didn't even give it a fair chance. This isn't over." Selfish. For wanting to maintain control of the business I'd built with my own hands. And that last line, "this isn't over," sounded less like a family member expressing disappointment and more like a threat from someone who'd watched too many corporate espionage movies. Delete. Delete, delete. The texts kept coming throughout the night, each one more desperate than the last. Isabel alternated between guilt trips, "How can you do this to us?" Emotional manipulation, "I thought you loved me," and thinly veiled threats, "Dad's lawyer thinks there might be grounds for a lawsuit." A lawsuit, because apparently, refusing to hand over your business to your unqualified sister-in-law was somehow actionable in their twisted version of reality. Around midnight, I turned off my phone and just sat there in the silence of my own space, drinking my beer and processing what had just happened. For 3 years, I'd been living in a carefully constructed fantasy where I thought I was part of a family. Turns out I'd actually been the mark in a long con. the target of a 3-year psychological campaign designed to soften me up for tonight's financial mugging. The worst part wasn't the money they'd wanted, though 45% of my profits would have been a hell of a hit. The worst part was realizing how completely they'd misunderstood who I was. They'd looked at my politeness and mistaken it for weakness. They'd seen my willingness to help family and interpreted it as an invitation to exploitation. They'd watched me work hard to build something meaningful and decided that made me a sucker who deserved to be taken advantage of. But here's what they'd failed to understand. There's a difference between being nice and being naive. There's a difference between family loyalty and financial martyrdom. And there's a huge difference between someone who's too polite to make waves and someone who's just been waiting for the right moment to show you exactly what those waves look like when they finally break. I'd spent 3 years being the accommodating son-in-law, the guy who showed up to family dinners and smiled through their casual condescension and paid for their medical treatments without complaint. Tonight, for the first time, I'd been myself, Aaron Mercer, the guy who'd built a successful medical practice from nothing, who'd earned every dollar in his bank account, and who sure as hell wasn't going to hand over his life's work to a family that saw him as a wallet with legs. And you know what? It felt absolutely fantastic. You know what they say about the best revenge being living well? Well, turns out they were absolutely right. And let me tell you, the next few months were like watching my life transform from a depressing indie film into one of those feel-good success stories that make you want to pump your fist in the air and buy everyone drinks. First thing that happened was the radio silence from Casa Mitchell lasted exactly 72 hours before desperation started setting in. Isabel's texts went from indignant to pleading to downright pathetic faster than a cryptocurrency crash. Aaron, please call me. We can work this out. I miss you. Miss me? Right. What she missed was her access to my financial success and the status that came with being married to a successful doctor. But here's the beautiful thing about cutting toxic people out of your life. Suddenly you have all this mental energy and emotional bandwidth that you didn't even realize was being drained by their constant neediness and manipulation. It was like finally removing a pair of shoes that had been too tight for years. You don't realize how much they were hurting until you take them off and feel that incredible relief. My partnership with Summit Health Partners turned out to be exactly what my clinic needed. These people were actual professionals who understood the healthcare industry instead of wannabe entrepreneurs whose business experience came from watching Shark Tank reruns. Within the first month, we'd streamlined my appointment scheduling system, upgraded my electronic health records, and implemented a patient follow-up program that was already showing measurable improvements in treatment outcomes. Jennifer Walsh, my account manager at Summit, was everything Veronica wasn't: competent, experienced, and refreshingly honest about what she did and didn't know. Your patient satisfaction scores are already above average, she told me during our first quarterly review. But there's definitely room for improvement in operational efficiency. Operational efficiency, not buzzword bingo or half-ass schemes to rebrand my practice as some kind of wellness spa, but actual, measurable improvements to how my clinic functioned. It was like having a conversation with an adult after 3 years of dealing with children who dressed up in business suits. The expansion happened faster than I'd expected. By month 3, we'd added 2 new treatment rooms and hired Sarah Chun, a licensed physical therapist who brought her own small but dedicated patient base. Sarah was exactly the kind of person I'd always wanted to work with: smart, dedicated, and more interested in helping people get better than in figuring out how to maximize profit margins. "This place has good energy," she told me on her first day, looking around the newly renovated space with the kind of professional appreciation that made my chest swell with pride. "You can tell someone actually cares about the work being done here. Someone actually cares. Damn right someone cares." I'd poured everything I had into this place, and it showed in every detail, from the comfortable waiting room furniture to the state-of-the-art equipment to the way my staff genuinely enjoyed coming to work every day. By month 4, we'd established our community outreach program. Something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the resources for when I was trying to support the Mitchell family's lifestyle. We partnered with 3 local high schools to provide sports injury prevention workshops and free screenings for student athletes. Watching 18-year-old kids learn proper stretching techniques and injury prevention strategies felt more rewarding than any fancy dinner party I'd ever attended at the Mitchell Mansion. The Underserved Patients Program launched in month 5. We reserved 4 appointment slots per week for people who couldn't afford regular health care, subsidized through a combination of our profits and a small grant I'd managed to secure through Summit's connections. Mrs. Rodriguez, a 63-year-old housekeeper with chronic back pain who'd been living on over-the-counter painkillers for 2 years, broke down crying when I told her we could provide ongoing treatment at no cost to her. "Doctor, are you sure?" she asked, her English heavily accented, but her gratitude crystal clear. "My insurance, it doesn't cover much, and I cannot pay the full price." "Mrs. Rodriguez," I told her, "taking care of people is why I became a doctor. The money is just what keeps the lights on." That's when it really hit me. This was what I'd always wanted my practice to be. Not a cash cow for entitled relatives, not a status symbol for social climbing in-laws, but an actual healthcare facility that made people's lives better. The kind of place where a housekeeper with back pain could get the same quality treatment as a tech executive with a sports injury. Meanwhile, the Mitchell family drama was playing out exactly like I'd expected. Isabel's texts became increasingly desperate and manipulative. "Dad's lawyer says there might be legal options for me to claim part of the clinic since I'm your wife." Legal options. Because apparently, being married to someone automatically entitled you to half their life's work, even if your only contribution was complaining about how much time they spent building it. My response was simple. I forwarded her text to my own lawyer, along with copies of our prenuptial agreement. Yeah, that's right. I'd been smart enough to insist on one despite her family's protests about it being unromantic. Funny how unromantic financial protection seems until you actually need it. Martin tried a different approach, reaching out through my accountant with vague threats about business interference and improper use of family connections. My accountant, bless his cynical heart, shut that down faster than a bar during last call. "Mr. Mitchell," he told Martin, "your son-in-law doesn't owe you jack shit. And if you keep harassing my client, we'll file a restraining order that'll make your country club friends very uncomfortable." But the real entertainment came from Veronica's social media campaign. Apparently, losing access to my clinic had triggered some kind of psychological breakdown where she convinced herself that all her business ideas were being stolen by competitors. Her Instagram stories became a daily soap opera of passive-aggressive posts about fake people and stolen opportunities and family betrayal. My personal favorite was the post where she announced she was starting her own wellness consultancy to help small businesses reach their full potential. Within a week, she'd managed to alienate 3 potential clients by suggesting they needed to completely rebrand their successful operations to match her vision of what a modern business should look like. The best part? None of it touched me. Their drama, their desperation, their increasingly pathetic attempts to maintain relevance in my life. It all felt like watching a bad reality TV show that you could turn off whenever you got bored. My clinic was thriving, my staff felt like family, and for the first time in 3 years, I was actually excited about going to work every morning. A year later, I'm standing in my office looking out at something that still makes me shake my head in amazement every single morning. The waiting room is buzzing with activity, not the frantic, overwhelmed chaos of an understaffed clinic, but the steady, purposeful energy of a place where people actually want to be. Well, as much as anyone wants to be at a medical facility, anyway. Sarah's laughing with Mrs. Patterson, an 80-year-old retired teacher who comes in twice a week for her arthritis treatments and always brings homemade cookies that she insists on sharing with the entire staff. Miguel, our new front desk coordinator, is patiently explaining insurance coverage to a nervous college student who's getting his first real injury evaluation. The whole scene feels like what I'd always imagined when I dreamed about having my own practice. Except better, because it's real and it's mine and nobody can take it away from me. The expansion to our second location is happening next month. Not because some entitled family member decided we needed to scale for maximum profit optimization, but because we've got a waiting list 3 weeks long and a reputation in the community that's bringing in referrals faster than we can handle them. The new space is going to specialize in sports medicine and rehabilitation, with 2 additional physical therapists and a massage therapist who actually knows what she's doing, unlike certain people I could mention who thought watching YouTube videos qualified as professional training. Dr. Amanda Foster, who's joining us next month, stopped by yesterday to finalize her contract details. She's exactly the kind of professional I want to work with. Board certified, experienced, and passionate about treating patients instead of treating bank accounts. I've heard really good things about this place, she told me while we toured the new facility. Word in the medical community is that you're doing things the right way here. The right way? Imagine that, running a healthcare facility with integrity and professional standards. What a revolutionary concept. Our scholarship program for young therapists is launching in the fall. We're partnering with the University of Washington's physical therapy program to provide hands-on training opportunities for students who show promise but need financial support. It's the kind of thing I'd always wanted to do, but never had the resources for when 45% of my profits were being siphoned off to support various Mitchell family lifestyle choices. The community health fair we organized last month drew over 300 people. Watching families get free health screenings, seeing kids learn about proper nutrition and exercise, helping elderly residents understand their Medicare benefits. That's the kind of impact I'd always wanted to have. Not as someone's cash machine, but as an actual healthcare provider making a real difference in people's lives. And speaking of the Mitchell family, their occasional attempts to insert themselves back into my life have become increasingly pathetic and increasingly ineffective. Isabel's texts have evolved from desperate pleas to lawyer threats to birthday cards with passive-aggressive messages about what we used to have. What we used to have was an arrangement where I worked my ass off while she spent my money and her family plotted to steal my business. I'm not exactly nostalgic for those good old days. Martin tried reaching out through a mutual business acquaintance last month, suggesting we put the past behind us and explore new opportunities for collaboration. The acquaintance, a guy who owns several successful restaurants downtown, just laughed and told Martin that anyone stupid enough to try to steal from Aaron Mercer probably wasn't someone he wanted to do business with. Word gets around in the business community, and apparently my reputation for not tolerating bullshit has become one of my selling points. Clara's latest attempt at reconciliation was a handwritten note that arrived with a gift basket full of expensive organic products that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. The note was all about family forgiveness and moving forward, and how life is too short to hold grudges. Life is also too short to waste time on people who see you as a profit center instead of a human being, but I guess that didn't make it into her Hallmark card philosophy. But the real crown jewel of their ongoing delusion was Veronica's announcement that she's starting her own healthcare consulting business. According to her LinkedIn profile, yes, I occasionally check their social media for entertainment value. She's now a healthcare innovation specialist who helps medical practices optimize their patient experience through strategic operational improvements. Her credentials for this new career? 3 months of nearly destroying my clinic and a certificate from some online business course that probably cost less than a decent dinner. The best part is that she's apparently been cold calling medical practices around Seattle, trying to sell her services based on her extensive experience in healthcare management. I know this because Dr. Peterson, who runs the orthopedic clinic 2 blocks from here, called me last week to ask if I knew anything about some woman named Mitchell who claims she used to manage your practice. Used to manage my practice? I told him. She couldn't manage a McDonald's drive-thru without causing a 3-car pileup. We both had a good laugh about that, but it's also a perfect example of how the Mitchell family operates. They can't just fade away quietly. They have to keep finding new ways to embarrass themselves while trying to profit from their connection to me. My divorce was finalized 3 months ago. Isabel fought for alimony until her lawyer explained that prenuptial agreements with cheating clauses aren't just suggestions, and that her little affair with her yoga instructor, yeah, I found out about that too, had basically voided any financial claims she might have had. Turns out that while I was building a successful business, she was building a relationship with someone who could help her achieve better mind-body alignment. The mind-body alignment apparently didn't include honesty or fidelity, but I'm sure that's just an oversight in the curriculum. These days, I wake up in my apartment, which I've actually started fixing up now that I'm not supporting someone else's shopping addiction. And I feel something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement about the day ahead. Not the grim determination of someone grinding through another day of being taken advantage of, but actual enthusiasm for the work I'm doing and the life I'm building. Yesterday, as I was locking up the clinic after a particularly satisfying day of helping people get better, I caught my reflection in the front window and realized something. I looked different. Not older or younger, but more solid somehow. More present. Like I'd finally grown into my own skin instead of wearing someone else's expectations like an ill-fitting suit. I whispered to myself, just loud enough to hear it echo off the empty street. I am Aaron Mercer. I built this with my own hands. And I don't answer to anyone who sees me as a wallet instead of a man. For the first time in my adult life, I feel completely, genuinely, authentically free. While I ate my birthday dinner alone, my wife and family was secretly celebrating my brother. They asked for my help with his wedding, so I gave them an answer they'll never forget before boarding a flight and disappearing forever. I packed my bags and left everyone shocked. Let me paint you a picture of my life before everything went sideways. Picture a guy who lives his entire existence like a perfectly balanced spreadsheet. Every cell in its place, every formula calculated down to the last decimal. That's me, Marcus Hale, 32 years old and counting, professional number cruncher extraordinaire. I analyze financial portfolios for a living, which basically means I spend my days telling rich people whether their money is making more money or if they're about to lose their shirts. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and feeds my obsession with patterns, precision, and making sense of chaos. But here's the kicker. While I've got everyone else's finances figured out to the penny, my own life has been running on some seriously screwed up accounting. See, at the office, I'm the guy who catches discrepancies that could cost millions. I'm the detail-oriented bastard who remembers which client prefers their reports in Times New Roman versus Arial. My colleagues respect me, my boss trusts me, and my work speaks for itself. But the moment I walk through my front door, man, I might as well be invisible ink on white paper. My wife Clara, beautiful, charming, social butterfly Clara, has this way of making me feel like I'm perpetually auditioning for the role of husband in my own damn marriage. Don't get me wrong, she's not evil or anything. She just has this talent for making me feel like the supporting character in what should be our story together. It's like she's the lead actress, and I'm the guy who delivers her coffee on set. Always there, always reliable, but never quite important enough to get my name in the credits. And then there's my family. Oh boy, where do I even start with that clusterfuck? My parents, Harold and Miriam Hale, are decent people who somehow managed to distribute their parental attention like they were running some kind of twisted charity where my younger brother Julian got 90% of the donations, and I got the leftover pocket change. Julian, golden boy, perpetual screw-up, charm machine Julian, has been the undisputed star of the Hale family show since the day he learned to walk. Here's how it works in our household. Julian sneezes, and suddenly it's a family emergency requiring a full-scale medical consultation and chicken soup delivery service. Julian gets a parking ticket, and Dad's calling his lawyer buddy to see if there's any way to fight it. Julian breaks up with a girlfriend, and Mom's planning an intervention complete with his favorite chocolate chip cookies and a 3-hour heart-to-heart session. Meanwhile, I could get promoted, buy a house, or solve world hunger, and the most I'd get is a "that's nice, honey," from Mom while she's scrolling through her phone looking at Julian's latest Instagram post. The really beautiful part? They don't even realize they're doing it. In their minds, they're just being supportive parents. They'd probably be genuinely shocked if you pointed out the obvious favoritism. What do you mean we treat Julian differently? We love both our boys equally. Yeah, sure you do, Mom. And I'm the Pope. But here's where things get interesting, where my story stops being just another sad tale of middle child syndrome and starts becoming something else entirely. My 30th birthday was coming up, and for once, for the first time in longer than I could remember, the people in my life seemed to give a shit about it. Clara had been dropping hints for weeks about some special surprise she was planning. Not subtle hints either, but the kind where she'd get this mysterious smile and say stuff like, "Oh, Marcus, you're going to love what I have in store for you." Dad, who usually forgot my birthday until Mom reminded him 3 days later, actually called me up and chuckled into the phone like he was in on some grand conspiracy. "Big day coming up, son," he said, and I could practically hear him grinning through the receiver. "Hope you're ready for it." Ready for what? I wanted to ask, but something about his tone made me think I should just play along. Even Julian, and this is where I should have known something was fishy, actually took time out of his busy schedule of being the center of the universe to text me. Julian, who usually only contacted me when he needed money or a ride somewhere or help moving his shit from one apartment to another, sent me a message that made my phone buzz with possibility. Get ready, bro. It's gonna be big. Bro. He called me bro. Julian hadn't called me bro since we were kids, back before he figured out that being the family favorite came with perks and privileges that didn't include sharing the spotlight with his boring older brother. So yeah, I let myself believe. For the first time in years, I allowed that dangerous little voice in my head to whisper, maybe this time is different. Maybe this time, you're the one they're thinking about. I know. I should have known better. At 32, you'd think I'd have learned not to set myself up for disappointment. But Hope is a stubborn little fucker, and it had been so long since anyone in my family had treated me like I mattered that I was practically starving for it. I went all out. Bought myself a sharp navy suit, not the discount rack special I usually grabbed, but the real deal from a store where they actually know your name and ask if you want your pants hemmed. Scheduled a proper haircut at one of those fancy places where they offer you whiskey while you wait and the barber actually listens when you describe what you want instead of just buzzing everything down to a number 2. I even told Devin, my work buddy who'd been trying to get me to loosen up for months, that maybe, just maybe, this year was going to be different. You seem different, man, Devin said when I mentioned the birthday plans. Like, actually excited about something for once. It's weird seeing you smile without looking like you're calculating tax penalties in your head. And he was right. For those few weeks leading up to my birthday, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, anticipation. Not the dread-filled anticipation of waiting for the other shoe to drop, but the good kind. The kind where you actually look forward to waking up because something good might happen. I started imagining what the surprise might be, maybe a party with actual friends instead of just family obligations, maybe a weekend getaway that Clara and I had been talking about, but never quite managed to book. Maybe just a dinner where I was the guest of honor instead of the guy picking up the check. I should have known better. I should have remembered that in the Hale family hierarchy, I'm not the main character. I'm barely even a supporting player. I'm more like the stagehand who makes sure the lights work and the curtain goes up on time. Essential but invisible, necessary but never celebrated. But for those few shining weeks, I let myself forget all that. I let myself believe that maybe, finally, it was my turn to be the center of attention. My turn to be the one everyone was excited about. My turn to matter. God, I was such an idiot. So there I was on the big day, dressed to kill in my fancy navy suit, hair perfectly styled, smelling like I'd bathed in expensive cologne. Basically looking like the kind of guy who deserved to have his birthday celebrated properly for once in his goddamn life. I'd even practiced my surprised face in the bathroom mirror that morning, which in retrospect makes me want to punch myself in the throat. But whatever. A man's gotta have dreams, right? I showed up at the Gilded Lantern at exactly 7:25 p.m. because punctuality is basically my religion, and also because I was so fucking excited I couldn't sit still at home for another second. The place was everything you'd expect from a restaurant that charges $40 for a piece of fish. All dim lighting and exposed brick walls, with servers who looked like they moonlighted as runway models and spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the evening's wine pairings. The host, some impossibly tall guy with cheekbones that could cut glass, greeted me with the kind of professional smile that probably required years of training. "Mr. Hale, right on time," he said, checking his tablet like he was accessing classified government files. "Your party hasn't arrived yet, but we have your table ready. Right this way, sir." And holy shit, what a table it was. The guy led me through the main dining room, past couples leaning into each other over candlelit conversations and business types discussing deals over plates that looked more like art installations than actual food, all the way to what he called the Starling Room. Private dining room, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. A table set for 6 people with wine glasses that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. The whole setup screamed special occasion, so loudly I could practically hear it echoing off the walls. "Your party isn't here yet," the host said, stating the obvious with the kind of polite discretion that expensive restaurants probably teach in their employee handbooks. "Can I start you off with something while you wait?" I ordered sparkling water because I wanted to stay sharp for whatever surprise was coming, and also because ordering anything stronger would have made me look like either an alcoholic or a nervous wreck. Neither was the vibe I was going for on my big night. So I sat there in my perfect suit at my perfect table with my perfect view, watching the city lights twinkle below like they were putting on a show just for me, and I waited. 7:30 came and went. No big deal. People run late. traffic happens. Maybe they were all coordinating their arrival to maximize the surprise factor. I sent Clara a casual text. Here, whenever you guys are ready, with one of those smiley face emojis that I never use but felt appropriate for the occasion. 7:45. Now I was checking my phone every 30 seconds like some kind of teenager waiting for his crush to text back. The server, a perfectly polished young woman who introduced herself as Ashley, came by to ask if I wanted to order an appetizer while I waited. Still expecting the rest of my party, I told her with what I hoped was a confident smile. Should be here any minute. 8 o'clock hit like a punch to the gut. That's when the first wave of real anxiety started creeping in, because Clara is a lot of things, but late isn't usually one of them. She's the type who shows up 15 minutes early to everything and then sits in her car until it's socially acceptable to walk in. I tried calling her, straight to voicemail, that generic robot voice telling me to leave a message like I was some telemarketer trying to sell her extended car warranties. I texted Julian. Where is everyone? Nothing. Not even one of those red receipts that lets you know your message made it through the digital void and into someone's consciousness. My parents' phones went straight to voicemail too, which was weird because Dad practically sleeps with his phone glued to his ear in case someone needs to discuss golf handicaps or complain about property taxes. By 8:15, I was doing that thing where you try to look casual while secretly having a nervous breakdown. You know what I'm talking about, pretending to read the menu for the 15th time, checking your reflection in the wine glasses to make sure you don't look as desperate as you feel, smiling politely at the server every time she glances in your direction like everything is totally fine and you're definitely not being stood up on your own birthday by your entire family. 8:30 rolled around, and that knot in my chest that had started as mild concern was now a full-blown boulder of dread. I was officially that guy. The one sitting alone at a table for 6, checking his phone every 10 seconds like maybe he'd missed the calls and texts that would explain why his wife, his brother, and his parents had all simultaneously vanished from the face of the earth. Ashley the server kept hovering at a respectful distance, probably wondering if she should call security or a therapist. The real kicker came at 8:45 when the host, Mr. Cheekbones himself, approached my table with the kind of apologetic expression you usually see at funeral homes. "Mr. Hale," he said, his voice dripping with professional sympathy, "I'm terribly sorry, but we have another party scheduled for this room at 9:30. Would you like us to move you to a table in the main dining room? Or, that little word hung in the air like a neon sign flashing, loser alert. Or would you like to admit that you've been ditched and get the hell out of here before this gets any more embarrassing?" My suit. That beautiful, expensive, confidence-boosting navy suit suddenly felt like a costume from some tragic one-man show. Like I was dressed up as a guy whose family actually gave a shit about him, but the performance was over and it was time to go home and face reality. I caught a glimpse of myself in the window reflection, and Jesus Christ, I looked exactly like what I was. The punchline to a cruel joke I wasn't even in on. "That's quite all right," I told him, mustering up whatever dignity I had left in my rapidly depleting reserves. "I think there's been some confusion. I'll just head out." The walk through the restaurant felt like a goddamn marathon. Every couple I passed seemed to be laughing a little too loudly. Every group of friends looked a little too happy. Every single person in that place looked like they belonged exactly where they were, while I felt like an imposter who'd been caught red-handed trying to pretend he mattered to someone. I grabbed a cab outside and the driver, bless his immigrant heart, didn't ask any questions when I gave him my address in a voice that probably sounded like I was recovering from throat surgery. I stopped at the first Chinese takeout place I saw and ordered enough food for 3 people, because apparently my birthday celebration was going to be me, myself, and some MS-gelatin comfort food eaten straight from the containers while I tried not to think about what the hell had just happened. Back home, I sat on my couch in my expensive suit, eating cold lo mein and wondering how I'd managed to fuck up my own birthday so spectacularly. That's when my phone finally rang, Clara's ringtone, the one I'd programmed to play at last, because I'm apparently a hopeless romantic idiot. "Marcus," she said, and I could hear laughter and music in the background. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry we missed dinner. Julian had such a bad day, and we all decided to cheer him up at the last minute. You understand, right? Julian had a bad day." My birthday got canceled because Julian had a bad day. That's when I realized I wasn't the guest of honor at my own life. I was just the guy who paid for everyone else's party. You know what the really fucked up thing about betrayal is? It's not the actual stabbing that gets you. It's finding out later that everyone was standing around watching while someone sharpened the knife. For 3 whole days after my birthday disaster, I walked around like a guy who'd been sucker punched but was still trying to convince himself it was just a really aggressive handshake. I kept telling myself that maybe Clara was right. Maybe it really was just unfortunate timing. Maybe Julian really did have some kind of emergency that required the immediate attention of my entire family on the exact night they were supposed to be celebrating me. Yeah, I know. I was basically gaslighting myself at this point, but hope dies hard when you've been surviving on scraps of it for most of your adult life. I probably could have gone on living in that delusional little bubble if it wasn't for the beautiful invention known as social media, that digital hellscape, where people go to humble brag about their perfect lives and accidentally reveal what massive pieces of shit they really are. 3 nights after my birthday, I was doing what any self-respecting millennial does when they can't sleep. Mindlessly scrolling through Facebook like some kind of digital zombie, looking at pictures of my high school classmates' kids, and trying to care about what my college roommate had for lunch. That's when I saw it. That's when the other shoe didn't just drop. It fucking pile drove me through the floor and into the basement of my own stupidity. Eric Donovan, Julian's best friend since high school, the kind of guy who posts inspirational quotes next to pictures of his protein shakes and thinks wearing a backward baseball cap makes him look 25 instead of 32. Eric, who I'd always thought was a harmless douchebag with the IQ of a goldfish and the social awareness of a brick wall. Turns out Eric was about to become my favorite person in the world, because Eric is apparently incapable of keeping his mouth shut or thinking before he posts. The photo showed up in my feed like a fucking guided missile aimed directly at whatever was left of my self-respect. Group shot, professional quality, everyone dressed to the nines and grinning like they'd just won the lottery. There was Julian, center stage as always, looking like he'd stepped off the cover of GQ, with his arm around his fiancée Sophia, who was practically glowing in some designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. My parents, Harold and Miriam, were raising champagne flutes in what was obviously a toast, both of them beaming with the kind of parental pride usually reserved for Nobel Prize announcements or grandchild arrivals. And there, right there in the fucking photo, was my wife Clara, her hand resting on Julian's shoulder like she was blessing him or some shit, her smile so bright it could have powered a small city. But here's the kicker, the detail that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. I recognized that background. Those windows, that view, that elegant private dining room setup. It was the Gilded Lantern. It was the goddamn Starling Room. The exact same room where I'd sat like a jackass for over an hour, checking my phone and making excuses to the server while my entire family was literally 1 floor below me, celebrating Julian's engagement. The caption was the cherry on top of this shit Sunday. Unforgettable night at the Gilded Lantern. Congrats Julian and Sophia. And the date stamp? My birthday. The exact fucking date of my birthday. I stared at that photo for so long my eyes started to water, and not just from the screen glare. I screenshotted it, saved it to my phone, and then just sat there in my living room at 2 in the morning, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and rearranged my internal organs just for fun. This wasn't some last-minute emergency. This wasn't unfortunate timing. This was a planned celebration that happened to fall on my birthday, and apparently everyone in my family thought that was just peachy. But you know what? I'm a financial analyst. I deal with patterns, data, evidence. When something doesn't add up in a spreadsheet, I don't just stare at the numbers and hope they'll magically change. I dig deeper. So that's exactly what I did. I opened up my laptop and created a new Excel file. Project Swan, I called it, because swans look all graceful and serene on the surface, but they're paddling like hell underwater, just like I was about to do. I set up columns: event, evidence, witness, notes. This was going to be a proper investigation, not some emotional meltdown based on social media posts and hurt feelings. First stop, Sophia's Pinterest boards. Because if there's one thing I've learned from being married to Clara, it's that women plan everything on Pinterest these days, and they're surprisingly careless about their privacy settings. Sure enough, Sophia's boards were wide open to the public, probably because she's one of those people who thinks everyone in the world is dying to know what kind of mason jar centerpieces she's considering for her dream wedding. Bingo. Engagement party inspiration boards. Photos of the Gilded Lantern dated 3 weeks before my birthday. Screenshots of their private dining room menus. Pins of champagne flute arrangements that looked exactly like the setup in Eric's photo. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment celebration. This was planned down to the last fucking detail. But I needed more than Pinterest boards and social media posts. I needed human intelligence, and I knew exactly where to get it. My cousin Janice, mom's sister's daughter, professional family gossip, and the kind of person who knows everyone's business before they know it themselves. Janice has been the unofficial family intelligence network since we were kids, the one who somehow always knows who's getting divorced, who's having money problems, and who's secretly dating their boss. I called her up the next day, casual as could be. Hey Janice, just wanted to catch up. How was Julian's engagement party? Heard it was quite the celebration. And God bless Janice's gossipy little heart. She spilled everything like a broken dam. Oh Marcus, it was gorgeous. Your mom planned it for weeks. She said it was unfortunate timing with your birthday and all, but you know how you are. You're so practical about these things. Of course Julian's engagement had to take precedence. I mean, how often does your baby brother get engaged, right? Precedence. That word hit me like a physical blow. Of course Julian's engagement had to take precedence over my birthday. Of course the family Golden Boy's good news was more important than celebrating the guy who'd been invisible his whole life. Of course my mother had planned this for weeks, knowing full well it would obliterate any birthday plans, and just assumed I'd be practical about it. Practical. Like I was a piece of furniture that could be moved around to accommodate more important events. Like my feelings were just an inconvenient variable in the equation of the Hale family's happiness. I thanked Janice for the information and hung up, then sat there staring at my Project Swan spreadsheet. All the evidence was there, laid out in neat columns and rows. The timeline, the planning, the deliberate choice to prioritize Julian's celebration over mine. It wasn't negligence or poor timing or an emergency. It was a conscious decision made by people who were supposed to love me, people who were supposed to give a shit about whether I felt valued or important or even basically human. That word, precedence, carved itself into my brain like someone had etched it there with a rusty knife. It became my new favorite word, actually, because it perfectly summed up my entire existence in the Hale family ecosystem. I would always take second place to Julian. I would always be the practical one who could be counted on to understand. I would always be the variable that got adjusted to make room for more important equations. Well, fuck that. And fuck them. If I was going to be a variable in their equation, I was going to be the kind that made their whole system crash. Here's the thing about revenge that nobody tells you in the movies. The best kind doesn't involve dramatic confrontations, or screaming matches, or throwing wine in people's faces at fancy restaurants. No, the really good stuff, the kind that cuts deep and leaves scars, is quiet. It's surgical. It's the difference between a sledgehammer and a scalpel, and I was about to become a fucking neurosurgeon. So I didn't explode. I didn't march into the next family dinner waving Eric's photograph around like some kind of deranged prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. I didn't call Clara out on her bullshit excuse about Julian's bad day, or demand an explanation from my parents about why they thought my birthday was less important than their Golden Boy's engagement party. Instead, I did something much more dangerous. I smiled. At Thanksgiving, I showed up with a nice bottle of wine and complimented Mom's turkey. At Christmas, I bought thoughtful presents for everyone and laughed at Dad's terrible jokes about the weather. When Julian and Sophia announced their wedding date at New Year's Eve dinner, I was the first one to raise my glass and offer a toast about how happy I was for them. I asked polite questions about their venue search, their guest list, their honeymoon plans. I was the picture of the supportive older brother, the reliable son, the steady husband who never caused drama or made scenes. They ate it up like starving people at a buffet. Mom kept commenting on how mature I was being about everything, how proud she was that her boys got along so well. Dad would clap me on the shoulder and say things like, "You're a good man, Marcus. Julian's lucky to have a brother like you." Clara would squeeze my hand under the dinner table and give me those grateful looks that wives give their husbands when they're behaving properly in public. The beautiful irony was that they thought I had swallowed the insult whole. They thought I had processed their betrayal through my practical, analytical brain and come to the reasonable conclusion that Julian's happiness was more important than my hurt feelings. They thought I was being the bigger person, taking the high road, showing the kind of emotional maturity that justified their decision to treat me like a second-class citizen in my own family. What they didn't realize was that I was conducting the most thorough emotional audit of my life. Every smile I gave them was calculated. Every "of course I understand" was a data point in a growing spreadsheet of grievances. Every time I bit my tongue, instead of telling them exactly what I thought of their priorities, I was making a deposit in an account that would eventually come due with interest. At work, though, that's where I really started to shine. Funny how getting completely fucked over by your family can motivate you to excel in other areas of your life. I threw myself into my job like a man possessed, staying late to analyze market trends, coming in early to review client portfolios, volunteering for projects that other analysts tried to avoid. My efficiency ratings went through the roof. My client satisfaction scores were the highest in the department. Devin started inviting me out more, probably because I seemed like less of a depressed robot and more like an actual human being with interests beyond balancing other people's books. "Man, you've been different lately," he said one Friday after I'd closed 3 major deals in 1 week. Like, focused in a scary way. "What's your secret? New vitamins? Meditation? Finally getting laid on a regular basis?" I laughed and told him I was just trying to maximize my potential, which was technically true. What I didn't tell him was that I was channeling all my rage and disappointment into becoming the kind of person who could execute long-term plans without flinching. The kind of person who could smile while sharpening knives. The kind of person who understood that patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon. My manager, Mr. Price, this old-school numbers guy who'd been with the company since calculators were cutting-edge technology, started pulling me aside for conversations about my career trajectory. "You've got potential, Hale," he'd say, adjusting his glasses and looking at me like I was a particularly promising stock pick. "Real potential. Keep this up, and we'll be talking about a promotion soon." Promotion. More money. More independence. More resources for whatever I was planning, which at that point was still just a vague sense that someday, somehow, I was going to make them all pay for treating me like I was disposable. I also started working out with my neighbor Raphael, this ex-military guy who lived 2 doors down and had the kind of discipline that made my anal retentive tendencies look like amateur hour. Raphael didn't ask a lot of questions about why I suddenly wanted to start running at 6 in the morning or why I was interested in learning how to box, but he seemed to understand that I was working through some shit. "Man, you've got a fighter's face when you run," he told me one morning after I'd pushed through a particularly brutal 5-mile circuit. "Like you're chasing something down or running away from something. Either way, it's working for you." He wasn't wrong. Every morning when I laced up my running shoes, I was chasing down the version of myself that would never again sit alone in a restaurant while his family celebrated someone else. I was running away from the guy who made excuses for people who didn't respect him, who accepted scraps of attention and called it love, who let himself be treated like a fucking afterthought in his own life. The weird thing was, the angrier I got, the calmer I became. It was like all that rage was crystallizing into something pure and focused, something that could be shaped and directed instead of just burning everything down in a mindless explosion. I wasn't fighting yet, not really, but I was definitely sharpening knives they couldn't see. Clara started commenting on how zen I seemed, how I didn't get stressed about work anymore, how I seemed more confident and self-assured. She attributed it to the exercise routine, the career success, maybe just getting older and more comfortable in my own skin. She had no idea that every kiss goodnight was a performance. Every "I love you too" was a line delivered by an actor who was perfecting his role while planning his exit strategy. My parents kept praising me for being so supportive of Julian's wedding planning, so helpful and encouraging about their venue search and budget discussions. They loved having a son who could offer practical advice about vendor contracts and timeline management without getting emotional or demanding attention for himself. They thought they had trained me well, turned me into the perfect supporting character who would always put family harmony above his own needs. What they had actually done was create a monster who understood exactly how their system worked and was quietly learning how to break it from the inside. Every family dinner where I smiled and nodded while they talked about Julian's future was a reconnaissance mission. Every conversation where I offered helpful suggestions about wedding planning was intelligence gathering. Every moment where I bit my tongue instead of telling them what I really thought was me loading ammunition for a war they didn't even know was coming. They thought I was being mature. I was being methodical. They thought I had forgiven them. I was planning their downfall. They thought I was the same old Marcus, reliable and predictable and safely contained within the boundaries they had set for me. They had no fucking idea what was coming. Nearly a year had passed since my birthday disaster, and I'd become a goddamn virtuoso at playing the role of the perfect family member. I showed up to every Sunday dinner with a smile that could sell insurance policies, asked all the right questions about Julian's career prospects and wedding plans, and never once let the mask slip. It was like method acting, except instead of preparing for a movie role, I was preparing for the performance of a lifetime. Sunday dinners at my parents' house had become my weekly masterclass in emotional control. Picture this. The whole family gathered around Mom's dining room table, the good china making its monthly appearance, Dad carving whatever meat Mom had spent all day obsessing over, and everyone pretending we were the kind of functional family you see in greeting card commercials. Julian would hold court with stories about his job at the marketing firm. Sophia would show off whatever new piece of jewelry he'd bought her, and my parents would beam like they were watching their son accept an Academy Award instead of just describing his latest client presentation. And there I was, the dutiful older brother, nodding at all the right moments, laughing at Julian's mediocre jokes, and asking follow-up questions that showed just how invested I was in his happiness. That sounds like a challenging project, Julian. How did you handle the client's feedback? Sophia, that necklace is gorgeous. Julian has such good taste. Mom, this roast is incredible. You outdid yourself again. I'd gotten so good at this performance that I started to enjoy it in a twisted way. It was like being a spy embedded in enemy territory, gathering intelligence while everyone around you thinks you're just another friendly face in the crowd. Every compliment I gave was a lie wrapped in silk. Every smile was a blade hidden behind velvet. Every, "I'm so happy for you guys," was me practicing for the moment when I'd reveal just how spectacularly wrong they'd been about everything. Clara had started commenting on how much more present I seemed during these family gatherings, how I'd really stepped up as a brother and son over the past year. She thought my newfound engagement with family life meant I was finally growing into the role of responsible older sibling, finally accepting my place in the family hierarchy with grace and maturity. Poor Clara. She had no idea she was married to a man who was conducting a long-term psychological experiment in delayed gratification. But the real test of my acting abilities came during this particular Sunday dinner in late March, when Sophia's eyes started glittering with that special kind of excitement that women get when they're about to drop some major announcement. She kept exchanging meaningful looks with Julian across the table, both of them barely containing whatever news they were dying to share. Mom had that knowing smile that meant she was already in on whatever was coming, and Dad kept checking his watch like he was timing the reveal for maximum dramatic impact. "So," Sophia said, drawing out the word like she was a game show host about to reveal the prize behind door number 3. "Julian and I have been talking, and we've realized we need some help with the wedding planning." She paused for effect, looking around the table to make sure she had everyone's attention. "There are just so many details to coordinate, and we want everything to be perfect." Julian jumped in with his trademark, charm-offensive grin. "The thing is, we need someone who's really organized, someone who's good with logistics and managing multiple moving parts." He was looking directly at me now, and I could see the exact moment when he was about to deliver the punchline to this elaborate setup. Someone who's got that analytical mind that can keep track of all the vendor contracts and timelines and budget spreadsheets. Mom was practically vibrating with excitement at this point, her hands clasped together like she was watching her favorite soap opera reach its dramatic climax. "Marcus," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of artificial sweetness that probably gave her cavities. "Since you're so organized and detail-oriented, we'd love for you to plan Julian and Sophia's wedding." The silence that followed was one of those movie moments where everything seems to slow down and you can hear your own heartbeat echoing in your ears. They were all looking at me with these expectant faces, waiting for my reaction to what they clearly thought was some kind of honor they were bestowing upon me. Like they were asking me to be the best man or give a speech at the reception, instead of asking me to become the unpaid wedding coordinator for the very people who had shit all over my birthday. Dad nodded approvingly, stroking his chin in that way he did when he thought he was being particularly wise. It makes perfect sense, he said, like he was solving some complex mathematical equation. You've got that head for business, that attention to detail. Julian and Sophia can focus on being the happy couple, and you can make sure all the logistics run smoothly. Clara squeezed my hand under the table, and I could feel her practically bouncing with enthusiasm. "Oh, Marcus, you'd be so good at that," she gushed. "Remember how perfectly you organized our anniversary dinner last year? You have such a gift for making sure everything goes exactly according to plan." Julian was smirking now, that same self-satisfied expression he'd worn since childhood whenever he was about to get his way without having to work for it. "So what do you say, bro? Want to help us throw the wedding of the century?" And in that moment, sitting there at my parents' dining room table with my entire family staring at me expectantly, I felt something click into place in my brain. It was like watching the final piece of a jigsaw puzzle slide perfectly into position, completing a picture that had been forming in my subconscious for months. They wanted me to plan Julian's wedding. They wanted to put me in charge of every single detail of the most important day in his life. They wanted to hand me the keys to the kingdom and trust me to make sure their golden boy celebration went off without a hitch. The irony was so beautiful, it was almost poetic. They were asking the guy they'd humiliated and ignored to become the architect of their happiness. They were giving the person they'd treated like a second-class citizen complete control over the event that mattered most to them. They were handing me a loaded gun and asking me to keep it safe for them. I smiled. Not the fake performance smile I'd been practicing for months, but something genuine and warm that came from a place of pure, crystalline joy. "Of course," I said, my voice steady and confident. "I'd be honored." The relief that swept around the table was almost palpable. Sophia actually clapped her hands together and squealed a little. Mom reached over and patted my cheek like I was still 10 years old and had just agreed to clean my room without being asked. Dad raised his wine glass in one of his impromptu toasts. "To Marcus," he declared, "the best wedding planner we could ask for." Julian reached across the table to shake my hand, still wearing that smug grin that made me want to punch him in his perfect teeth. "Thanks, man. I knew I could count on you." And as I shook his hand and looked him directly in the eyes, I felt a surge of anticipation that was better than any drug. They had no idea what they'd just done. They thought they were asking their reliable, practical family member to help them celebrate love and commitment and happily ever after. What they'd actually done was hand me the blueprints to their destruction and ask me to build it myself. That night, I went home and started planning. Not Julian's wedding. That would come later. First, I was planning something much more important. The systematic demolition of every assumption my family had ever made about who I was and what I was willing to tolerate. I opened up a new file on my computer and titled it The Binder. It was going to be the most comprehensive wedding planning document ever created, and it was going to be absolutely perfect. Because when I destroyed Julian's wedding, I wanted to make sure there was no doubt that I could have made it spectacular if I'd chosen to. For the next 6 months, I became the most dedicated wedding planner in the